Good morning. Welcome to IPC. I am very honored and very privileged today to have Lisel Hintz with us. Now, Lisel is, of course, a good old friend of not just mine, of us, broader community, and also of IPC. We're very happy to have her here on summer sabbaticals, where also in the past she's worked on multiple of her book projects and articles, and we're very honored to have her at IPC and to host her many talks here as well, also to get some feedback from the community here in Istanbul. Now, today, Lisel doesn't need an introduction, but let me just, introduce her anyway, for those of you who might not be familiar with her work. Lisel is an assistant professor at Johns Hopkins SAIS in DC. She previously held positions at Cornell and Barnard College, Columbia University, and she works on the intersection of identity politics, foreign defense policy, authoritarianism, and the politics of media. She had an excellent first book, which I also cite in my own work, Identity Politics Inside Out, National Identity Contestation and Foreign Policy in Turkey from Oxford. And now she's completing multiple book projects, and some of them I also had the privilege of hearing previously at the ISA, the final one, on the politics of popular culture under authoritarianism and on populist grand strategy. She has published various articles in many, many different top-tier journals, and she also is a public commentator in various outlets, including BBC, Washington Times, New York Times, etc., etc. And today she's going to present us her, results of her 3-year project. So this is, in fact, a very sort of long endeavor that she had been working on, I personally know, for a very long time, on the audiovisual strategies that the AKP, the Justice and Development Party, uses and has used in Turkey to consolidate its rule, to boost its legitimacy, and to garner support across its, not just in its core constituency, but also across a wider segment of society and the electorate. And the title of her talk is Filmmaking Turkey Great Again, Findings from a Dataset on AKP Audiovisual Strategies. Now, of course, I'm sure she's going to get into the methods and the sources, but also let me say that she and her co-author, because I think there's also a co-author involved, right? Jonas Bergendragi, they've been collecting a huge data set of the videos, of especially YouTube videos, social media channels, and all the sort of the media apparatus and the content that the AKP uses to assert a certain version of truth, history, reality, in the way of consolidating its role. So without further ado, I will just step to the side and give the floor to Lisel. Lisel, please.
Oh, goodness. Thank you so much, Sanem Hoca, for that very, very generous introduction and welcome. Thank you to IPC, to Jana, to Mariam, to Funda, to the whole team for putting this together. Thank you to Sanem Hoca and to IPC for hosting me for 3 summers now, where I've been a visiting researcher here. It's been a wonderful community to work with, to engage with, to be able to do a lot of the work that I'm going to be presenting today. If you've walked past me in the hallways and you've seen me kind of typing away, like I've got a big Excel sheet in front of me, this is what I've been working on. This and a project on cooking shows as conservative gender entertainment projects, which is forthcoming in Politics and Gender as of a couple of days ago, so very proud of that. So I've been able to get a lot of work done here. I also want to acknowledge that the last time I was here giving a talk in this room, Fuat Hoca asked me sort of about the uses of history in the, at the time, pop culture project that I was talking about. And I was saying, well, actually, I have a project on regime videos and the way in which the AKP is instrumentalizing history in these YouTube videos. And over lunch, we talked about them, and he had some great ideas. So I really want to acknowledge his generosity, and especially within this room. So
and this is the Fuat Keyman.
This is, of course, the Fuat Keyman room, hence why it's very, very meaningful. So again, thank you to everyone, and thank you for coming on a Thursday morning after a very hot day yesterday. Luckily, it's a little bit cooler today. I'm indeed honored to be able to present this project, and I'm actually going to talk about 3 papers that are all stemming from this very large data set that Jonas Bergendrega at Oslo New University College and I have been working on for the past 3 years. And again, exactly as Senem Hoca mentioned, we are basically trying to audio visualize the political science toolkit. We obviously have lots and lots of scholars doing excellent work in media studies, cultural studies, sociology, anthropology, who, for disciplinary and structural publication reasons, perhaps feel a bit more comfortable working with images in political science and kind of the quantification statistics bias that we tend to see in that. There can be some resistance against publishing things that are using methods like intertextual multimodal content analysis. But I stand here today with a publication forthcoming in Perspectives on Politics from this project to say that you too can use these methods if you want to. So, because governments have audio visualized their toolkits in the way that they are trying to cultivate legitimacy, and exactly as was mentioned, garner support not only from their key constituencies and base, but from a wider array of individuals, we think that we too, as political scientists, should audio visualize our toolkit. So, filmmaking Turkey, great. Again, you can obviously get the making America great again. You can get all of those references is there. So we're going to be looking at populist authoritarian strategies. Now I'm going to be presenting the data set from Turkey, but the way in which we use the data is comparative. We are talking about similar strategies we're seeing in Russia, in India, that we're seeing in Brazil, and so forth. So we definitely have a comparative aspect, but today, given the place, given the audience, we're going to dive deep into the Turkey case. So I have a couple of images here. You can't see them as super clearly as I would like, but in fact, they have a distinctive, or at least the top 2, kind of fuzzy nature because they're depicting history, and you sometimes see a sepia-like tone to evoke maybe a nostalgia of what the television might have looked like at the time. Does anyone have any idea what these are from or what they are referencing? I'm just interested in your impressions when you see these images. Any guesses? Anyone familiar with this or what you think is being communicated? You're like, I just came to listen. I didn't think I was going to have to participate. Any guesses? All right, well, we have 3 images from one video, which may seem a little strange because they look like they're coming from very different eras. And in fact, what I'm trying to argue in the project is that the regime is deliberately, there's a little bit clearer, thank you, Jenna, is deliberately instrumentalizing history to legitimize its current and future rule, drawing on past threats, drawing on past greatnesses to say we still have threats that exist. We still have those from within and from without that are trying to challenge us. And so you need us to stay in power. So the top 2 images are in fact completely anachronistic. One is Barbarossa, right? He is Hayrettin Pasha. He is the sort of chief naval corsair of the Ottomans. And he is leading a charge in exploring and conquering the Mediterranean, right? He's expanding the naval presence of the Ottoman Empire. He sees in his binoculars when he looks out in the ocean, he sees crusaders from a completely different century, by the way. Like these are hundreds of years apart, right? But they put together and they're fighting and they're clashing. And what's fascinating is that the Ottomans are using sophisticated tools of navigation. And they are praying to Allah before they are going on their journey. And the Crusaders have like chainmail and these vicious expressions, and they look crude and barbaric, and they're just about violence. And it's a totally different depiction of 2 sides who are fighting against each other. One legitimate, one, backward and barbaric, and so forth. So we then tie that to Turkey's naval doctrine, the Blue Homeland doctrine from the late 2010s, early 2020s. And we are showing that there are still threats on our coastline from Christians. And there are still threats on our coastline from these invaders, and we need to organize and protect against them. So this is from a September 2020 video that was released by the Directorate of Communications. If you remember the summer of September of 2020, there were very, very high tensions between Turkey, Greece, and Cyprus. There were some collisions among frigates. There was oil exploration. There were all kinds of rhetoric, there was helicopters, all kinds of sort of military strategies to threaten the other that were used. And here, organized, professional, clean, pristine, you have these naval officers who are lining up in the words Mavi Vatan, that we are blue homeland, we embody this particular doctrine. I find this fascinating. I think this is really interesting. So you'll see these images come up again, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of context for it. So what are the motivations for this project? Why did I spend 3 years with Jonas Bergendrege, as I mentioned, putting together all of these videos, trying to find some way of communicating to a wider audience what populist authoritarian leaders are doing? As I said, regimes have audiovisualized their toolkits. We want to audiovisualize ours as well. So if we're looking at populist authoritarian regimes, and I won't go into the deeper literature, I'm happy to do that if people have questions, but there's lots of ways that individual governments who do not have, say, free elections are able to stay in power. And the authoritarianism literature has kind of settled on 3 tactics: repression, co-optation, and legitimation, right? So you either push them down and you use violence against them and you intimidate them, or you provide incentives and patronage and handouts and you get them on board, or you try to convince them that you're actually the one who should stay in power. So we're going to look at the legitimation strategies. Within the legitimation literature, there's sort of like 3 strands. 3 seems to be the magic number. First is performance legitimacy, right? You are achieving economic growth. You are providing handouts. You are allowing new jobs to be created. There's some kind of economic benefit. So this is the political economy strand of the literature. You then have the institutional facade strategies where you hold elections, you make it look like there's democracy, you make it look like there's participation. Maybe there's some committees on which individuals can participate, but that doesn't really mean that those ideas trickle up to the government. So some kind of institutional facade. And then a lot of the literature focuses on discourse. There's literally an article by Grishevsky, one of the political scientists who works most frequently on this. Dukakis is a co-author. And I think it's titled something like, "What are authoritarians saying about themselves?" And it's looking at these discursive strategies. But I think what's interesting is that in the political science literature, there is such a heavy focus on speech-based rhetoric, just words. And that can be what the actual speeches are. It can be what's written about them. But it's basically text analysis. And by text, I mean written speech. So verbal and written, just words. And that's interesting because that's not actually what authoritarians are doing, or at least that's not all that authoritarians are doing. And so we want to push away from that bias looking just at words and expand our toolkit. So lots and lots of great work looking at discursive legitimation, but a very, very heavy focus on speech-based rhetoric. But empirically, we know that governments spend lots and lots and lots of money on audiovisual strategies, on spectacles, on concerts, on films, on videos, on the kind of stuff that I'm looking at. So we want to kind of make sure that we're capturing that as well. There is some work on this, and again, this kind of has to do with structural things that are baked into political science. It's on testing effects, right? They want to be able to show, these survey experiments are showing a video to 5,000 individuals found through Facebook using Qualtrics or using some kind of method, and they are measuring whether levels of nationalism go up, right? So you watch a 20-second video, do you see that there's a change in people's perception of the regime? Really important questions. Some of the work being done is really good, but it doesn't really get at what it is that they're showing them, right? What is that content? What are the themes? What are the symbols? What is it made up of? And then there are also questions of, okay, well, maybe you get a nationalism bump for 30 seconds after watching the video, but 2 hours later, do you still see that? So there are some questions about this effects testing. Again, some really good work being done, but we see the need to focus more on the content as well as how and when and why regimes are using it. There are a couple of really good first cuts that get in depth into the content. Asma Ozar and Burak Özçetin have a fantastic piece looking in depth at 3 videos from the Directorate of Communications. Madhukar on India, Bajunars on Russia, Zhu on China. Really good in-depth studies, but relatively limited in scope. So our solution is build a data set. don't just look at 2 or 3 videos. Yes, that's useful, but let's see if we can kind of look at the whole corpus of what these governments are doing. But before we get to the data set, why? Why are we studying audiovisual strategies? Well, again, empirically, governments are using them quite a bit. So why are we leaving this uncovered, at least in political science, where we're asking questions of regime durability and voting behavior and things like that? Well, if we see some of the most common individuals who are frequenting these videos, Putin, for example, you see in all kinds of performative masculinity roles, right? He's like wrestling tigers and riding horses, and he's bare-chested, and he's flying helicopters, and then he injured his back in some kind of incident, and then he had to hide for a while. But it's basically like a demonstration of power, a demonstration of force, of masculinity, of a lot of the qualities that we think of, particularly that populist regimes are trying to communicate. It's also a way of being able to show, perhaps even more effectively than through words, we argue, that people are in support of the regime, right? So here we have a video from China. They're lining up in front of a particular historic monument. They are in sync. They're in with the regime. Now, have they been assembled there by a production crew to do this? Yes, they have. But the audiovisual strategies can communicate that better than words. And what I really want to get across, and this is something that I've been working on a long time in a number of different projects, is that images and sound have a very specific role in political communication, which intuitively you're probably familiar with, but we forget about when we read all these articles about speech-based rhetoric. Think about what an image can do cognitively. And by that, I mean, how quickly can it communicate information? How quickly and effectively can it get across something very complex, like a number of historical battles, right? Or the ways in which we face multiple threats. You can say those things, but you can get those ideas across much more quickly in a more compelling manner, research shows, research that we cite, by using imagery. So it has a cognitive function. It also has an affective function. It shapes the way that we feel about things. It evokes emotions. It engages us. It makes us much more susceptible to learning. We imbibe more material when we are seeing it in an audiovisual manner than when we are hearing it. There's all kinds of good work on edutainment that shows this, that you can get more knowledge retention, but you also have more investment. So there's an emotional factor as well. And then the contextual factor, right? It's difficult to describe sort of a historical trajectory or how this particular point fits in a larger story, but you can do that very quickly and very easily through imagery. And I have an article in 2021 where I use the term an affective heuristic, where it is a kind of a shortcut that communicates information, it evokes emotions, and it puts it in context. Now, I've been using words, and that's tough to get across. What does that do? Does anyone recognize that image? Yes, nodding. What is this image? Julia Jones.
Syrian refugee child washed up on the gym.
Okay, exactly. A Syrian refugee child, Alan Kurdi, who washed up on the coast. This became a viral image. This became the subject of lots of political cartoons criticizing the EU's handling of refugee issues. This is something that you see, and because of its virality in part, because it's such an everyday child with shorts and a t-shirt, and he's in such a sort of, almost as though he could be sleeping, but he's not. This is incredibly emotionally powerful. You know what has happened to this child, and you know the larger context in which it fits, right? So this, again, I'm trying to communicate that these images can get this across better than words can. In the Turkish context, here's an image that comes from, and again, I know it's kind of far away. I can share the slides later. These images will come in the article that is being published as well. Can anyone see what is in that image? Idem?
Barış Manço.
Barış Manço. Yes. Okay. Can you say who Barış Manço is? Put you on the spot. Check the pop culture.
Yeah, it's like a singer. Yeah, he used to be singing.
Yeah. Exactly. So an old singer, kind of an icon, liked by multiple audiences, right? Kind of across the board, hosted a children's television show, a really beloved national figure. When he died, lots and lots of people mourned. So this particular individual can, again, by this particular audience, immediately be recognized. There's probably a positive affect that is evoked. And there's sort of this, like I said earlier, sepia colored, mom cooking in a house dress in the background. Child is watching this child program on television. This is an image from a 2014 AKP campaign video saying that we are kind of going to bring us back to the old days of the family. So it's evoking that family nostalgia. So again, using something that's very quickly recognizable, has some kind of positive affect, some kind of positive connotation, and then this larger context of family and kind of mom in the kitchen and conservative values. Yeah.
It's also flipping the leftist to AK.
Yes, exactly. So this is the other thing that I was talking about earlier with bringing in multiple audiences. So the fact that Barış Manço is liked by leftists, is liked by nationalists, is liked by a wide spectrum, makes him a positive figure for wide audiences, right? He's not going to turn someone off by using that individual people. So now we get to building the data set. What on earth have Jonas and I been doing? So as I said, Jonas Berger-Drege is the co-author. What I want to do is acknowledge the incredible work that two research assistants have done. Didem Theis, and I want to introduce their work as well, is currently a postdoctoral fellow at Central European University. At the time we did the project, she was a PhD candidate at SUNY Binghamton. She works on populism and democratic backsliding. She was the lead RA. And we also worked with Ezgi Kubris, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Rochester. If you know anything about the USC, you know she knows her data analytics. If she's at the University of Rochester, it's a very quant-heavy school. And in addition to data analytics, she works on judicial politics as well. So we worked as a 4-person team, and these two are integral to this project. What we did is working, again, iteratively, figuring out our coding strategy, figuring out what we wanted to gather data on, how we're going to do it, what code book we're going to use, and so forth. We started with web scraping all of the YouTube videos from 6 party and state institutions. YouTube was established in 2005, and we go up to the end of 2022. So we gather a pretty large chunk of AKP's time and power and an evolution in levels of democracy and autocracy within them, right? Which we think is important. So in terms of the institutions that we chose, we looked at the 2 party institutions, so the AKP and then its youth branch, Gençlik Kolları. And then we also looked at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Diyanet, Directorate of Religious Affairs, the Office of the Presidency, and the Communications Directorate, which of course was only established in 2018. So that's important to keep in mind. What we did first is look for trends in the metadata. So basically the data about the data set, right? And we looked at basically when these videos were released over time. What's interesting is that although YouTube has been around since 2005, the first video doesn't come out until 2012. So you don't see any government institutions using YouTube until 2012. That's interesting. And then we see some peaks, we see it going up and up and up, and we see it spiking in 2021. Now that tells us something. It doesn't tell us a whole lot. It shows that they kind of get in on the game in 2012, and then they're sort of increasing their use later on. So while we thought, okay, that's interesting, let's also look at data about which institution and number of views. Now I put views in question mark because everybody always wants to know how many views a video has, but this is a very, very problematic metric. This could be because if you're only looking at the views of one video on one channel, you're not capturing where else it might have been shared, right? So it could be that it's shared by the Director of Communications, but then it also has lots and lots of other shares on other platforms. So you're not really getting visibility of the video, you're getting visibility of the institutional channel, right? I can talk more about these later. But in terms of institutions, we were interested in this. So, and again, I can share the slides later. What's interesting is that you have the Director of Communications established in 2018. Their share rapidly grows, right? So they start off small and then they're kind of growing. But if we only study the Director of Communications, we miss a whole lot of what these other institutions are doing. They are also engaging in political communication. So we wanted to show that as well, that it's important to look at the Diyanet, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and so forth, right? So green is Diyanet, and presidency is at the bottom. So the presidency share kind of goes down, which makes sense because the Director of Communications is part of the Office of the President. So again, good to look at the Director of Communications, but it's not the only institution that's doing this. So now we've got the metadata. Now we want to look at the content of these actual videos. And again, this was an iterative collaborative process over time amongst the 4 of us. So the things that we gathered are the title, obviously the publication date. We've got the channel list on some other factors that I'll talk about in a second. So the basic metadata that you would gather. The first thing we wanted to do was separate the vast number of just unedited news clips, just like a 30-second video conference or speech or something like that, from actually heavily curated, heavily produced videos. This is something that we're very interested in. We call these storytelling videos. And I can talk about the criteria. It's 60 seconds to 10 minutes. It has to have some kind of production value. It has to be kind of heavily curated. There's some kind of narrative element of it. And so there, where we start to get really interesting, we start asking questions like, who is the hero? Is there a martyr? Where is the martyr? Or who is the victor? Where is the greatness? Or who is the character of greatness? Is there an enemy? Is the enemy explicit? Who is the enemy? Right? So again, lots of rounds of coding to make sure that if you're coding that as an enemy, are other people coding that as an enemy? So this is where the 3 years comes in, right? Going through each of these. So this is what we did for storytelling videos. So now we want to think about, we've understood how we got to the data set. If there are questions, I can talk about that more in the Q&A. So understanding how these function, how do they engage in legitimation? We find 3 magic number ways in which they do. So these are the 3 papers that we've got. The first is a concept that I term selective revivification. This is extracting particular elements of history, curating them in a particular way that you're bringing them back to life. You are taking threats that occurred or battles or sacrifices that happened in the 1500s, and you are making them alive again for people. You're making them experience the emotion. You're making them think they're important. You're reminding of them and you're revivifying. So instrumentalizations of history selectively. So again, the image over this is a little blurry, so I'll explain what this image is on the right-hand side. This is also from that video that I mentioned, the blue homeland that came out in 2020. Here you have a naval officer. Behind him, you have a picture of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. But this is before he is the president of the republic, and he wears European clothes, and he's got the hat law and all those kinds of things. And he's engaging in westernizing and secularizing forms. This is him with the phrase from which is, let's see, can I even see it? It's something like military is your first goal is the Mediterranean, right? So this is something that you have an image of a kalpak wearing individual, a Ghazi Mustafa Kemal. You don't have the cravat wearing, raka drinking, secularizing individual. You have someone who's going to appeal to multiple audiences, similar to Barış Manço. So this is the image of this individual that is most used in these videos. The next mechanism that we find of legitimation is rally round the screen. And this is where we get into the literature kind of in the rally round the flag section of IR, but we're looking at the ways in which threats can be constructed, but also produced through audiovisual materials, and how individuals can benefit from a rally round the flag effect without having to actually engage in current conflict. You can sort of use the specter of threats to boost public opinion. Right? Without having to actually engage in diversionary war. So here we have that image from that video that I mentioned again, sort of this idea that there are these Christians, these marauding Christians, again, completely anachronistic from any of the other images that we're using in that video, but they are threatening our borders and we need to take action against them, right? So this again can kind of be used to convince the people that the current government needs to stay in power in order to protect our borders and achieve greatness against these civilizational others, these marauding others. And then lastly, and I don't have this one in bold, I'm thinking of the title Strong Man of the People. I'm not sure yet, but I like to have catchy titles for things in order to help concretize them. It's my own little cognitive heuristic. But basically the way in which the individual, not the government or the regime, but the individual is necessary, is appropriate, and is performing well. So there's an incredible video, it's called Sen Kimsin. When it first came out, this was actually a source of a lot of controversy on social media, because it's basically asking, who are you? And throughout the narrative of this video, it's like a 10-minute video, and it's saying, you are Fatih Sultan Mehmet. You are Necmettin Erbakan. You are Kara Fatma. You are all of these individuals, right? So it shows image after image of martyrs and heroes the 1960 coup martyrs, Turgut Özal, right? All of those who in speeches Erdogan refers to, but here you see them kind of coming to life in this, vaunted manner. And then at the very end, images of each of those who have been shown throughout the video coalesce and come together into Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And at the end, it says, "You are the one who stood at the UN and said the world is bigger than 5. You are the Ummah. You are Recep Tayyip Erdogan." Right? So there's that personalization, making the connection with the audience and the leader. So these are the 3 legitimation functions that we find. So quickly, I'll talk about selective revivification. Again, this is the instrumentalization of historical elements. So we want to actually get into what is the content being used. So, and this is going to sound very small compared to the larger number of videos, which is 11,165, all of the videos that we hand coded. Yes, that's the data set, right? And again, this took 3 years. But 134 narrative, curated, produced, labor and capital intensive videos. And we wanted to know of that number, how many include a historical element that is pre-AKP era? How many are trying to tie historical figures and events and victories and sacrifices to the current government? And we had 70 of those. So again, looking at the meta trends, kind of what does the data set look like overall? What's really interesting here is that these storytelling videos, whereas you start to see news clips in 2012, storytelling videos start in 2015, the very first one, okay? And then you have kind of a spike as more and more come out. So what's really interesting is that the number of non-history videos is in black. The number of those that are history referencing is the grid, is kind of the dotted one here. So look at the percentage of references to history that's increasing over time. We find that really interesting. And I can talk more about that. And then we wanted to know, well, what are these historical references, right? Which are coming up most frequently? So the one that is most frequently referenced, and again, this is where we have to do hand coding of each of these videos and then check with each other to make sure that we're doing it consistently, is elements of the independence war. So Dumlu Pınar comes up quite frequently, right? We have the Gallipoli campaign, so lots of references to Çanakkale. We have Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. Now you're going to say, well, these overlap, right? Because some of these people were at both places, or some of these events were part of larger events. We did allow for a video to contain multiple events, but we would take a particular event like World War I and see, well, what element is being emphasized. So the Gallipoli campaign, for example, is referenced quite frequently. There's a few videos that refer to World War I, but are not about Gallipoli, which is interesting because that tells us that if we're looking at that era, this is the one that we want to put focus on. So then you kind of got Ottoman Empire in general. Again, these could be images or symbols or references or music elements. And talk more about that. Some coups, conquest of Istanbul, and so forth. Okay. So again, what's interesting is that those at the top are those that can apply to multiple audiences, right? Those who are sort of on the left, those who are nationalists, those who are AKP supporters. Because at the time, there were fights against the West, fights against Allied powers, and obviously fights against Greece, Christians, so forth. All right, so now we have coded content elements, yes, no, which one. Now we want to really get deep into themes. And this is what I did the most of. I did other parts as well, but this one I sort of took the lead on. And of those themes, we are finding some kind of historical continuity. So there's something that happened in the past, and there's some way we're going to use narratives to tie it to the current regime. We're going to have, for example, in this video called From Malazgirt or Manzikert to Dumlu Pınar. And we're going to have a soldier on horseback who starts off with the flag and the attire of someone from Malazgirt. And we're going to have that individual continue its battle, riding, and the costume is going to change, and the background context is going to change, and all of a sudden he's going to be in Çanakkale. And then all of a sudden he's going to be at Dumlu Pınar. Right? So there's a theme of similar actors kind of taking this course through history. And the symbols are being used to show that quickly and efficiently. Imagine having to explain that to an audience with words. You can't do that as quickly and effectively as you can with one individual on a horse making progress. Yeah. Yes, it was with minutes. Huh. Yeah, right here. Sorry. 1017 Monterey. So this is for English speaking audience, the table. Also, it says Mehmed the Conqueror, so we adjusted that at the very end, so I used the T instead of the D. But thank you for catching that. Okay, then great strength and great sacrifice, right? So the fact that we can achieve tons of things, we're extremely powerful, but we've also lost a lot, and we've been willing to sacrifice. So here's where, that's going to cover it up a bit, but I can explain this to you. Here's where intertextual analysis is really useful. Intertextual analysis is a particular type of critical discourse analysis that allows you to see how texts speak to and build upon each other. So you're looking at references to other references. You're looking at similar uses of themes and symbols across a wider corpus, right? So in a lot of the videos, you saw this phrase, right? Just as our hopes were about to die, right? Just as we were about to give up, that's when we achieved victory. So this coming from Karaköy. So you see a very, very similar wording in the screenshot over here. That's pretty small, but yeah, tükenmek üzereydi. So again, just when we were about to give up, or just when hopes were about to be extinguished. And lastly, we see vague but perennial threats, the sense that we've always been under threat, but it's not often specified who the enemy is, which is quite smart, right? Because then you can appeal to multiple audiences and you don't have to anger any particular individual. What's really interesting in this particular video, which was on the, I believe, the first anniversary of the July 15th, 2016 coup, you've probably seen it. Again, I can share it afterwards, but you have this revivification or this kind of population rising up, pushing back against these putschists, these coup plotters. But the way in which the coup plotters are portrayed is fascinating because they're in black and white, and you can never see their faces. So are they coup plotters on July 15th? Are they coup plotters in 1960? Are they coup plotters in 1971? Are they coup plotters in 1980, right? You're not sure. They're sort of vague and clearly in the past with the black and white frame. Again, here you have, symbolic kind of the Turkish flag, a father and son who are willing to kind of rise up against these individuals pointing their weapons at them. Again, faces blurred and in black and white. So lastly, the rally round the screen effect. I'm not going to show the personality cult one because we're still working on that, but I'm happy to talk about it. In terms of the content analysis, here we're expanding the number of videos that we're coding. And we're not looking at just curated storytelling videos, but rather every video, including news clips, that have some kind of reference to a foreign actor in the title. So here we're coding first on titles. We started with the countries that border Turkey, and then we also used countries that frequently come up in the news or are listed on the foreign ministry, like that there are substantial discussion of them on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website. Again, I can talk more about that. So in addition to the bordering countries, you have things like Saudi Arabia, you have Germany, the UK, and so forth, and of course the United States. So again, looking at the trends and the video content, we see a couple of things that's really interesting. It's very difficult to distinguish between Greece and Cyprus in a lot of the videos, which makes a lot of sense. Those issues historically, politically are very, very tied. If you see a video that has Greece in the title, it almost always has some kind of reference to Cyprus in it. So therefore, we coded those together. We have graphs using them separately. I could show those or send those at a different time. And then Israel/Palestine are also inseparable. So if you have reference to one, you have reference to the other. So we have those coded. So those that come up most frequently, Israel, Palestine, Greece, Cyprus, Saudi Arabia, interestingly, I can talk about why that's the case. It's 99.9% Diyanet videos about Hajj. And then we have Syria, Azerbaijan, and the US. What's really important here is that, of course, not all of these are portraying threats. Not all of them are portraying the foreign other as a threat, which is why, as political scientists, we can't just code videos based on title. Because if you were watching the Azerbaijan videos, what would you say? Turkey's your brother, right? This is two nations. one country, all that kind of stuff. Sorry, two countries, one nation. So you have to look at the content and the way in which the particular actor is being portrayed. So just a couple of quick videos. As I said, looking at those by institution, you see that the very large share of Diyanet videos are about Saudi Arabia. That's not surprising. The second is Israel-Palestine. That's not surprising. This is looking at which videos are getting the most attention at the time. So this is not the absolute number of videos. This is kind of who has the lion's share of attention. And this seems to correspond with what's going on the ground, which makes sense intuitively, but we want to know, like, are they just completely fabricating threats? Are they kind of amplifying existing threats? So you see kind of post-Operation Euphrates Shield, you see Syria grabbing the most attention around 2018, 2017, 2018. You have Israel-Palestine peaking after the move of the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and the protests that happened after that, and then the move of diplomatic relations to the level of second secretary, withdrawal of ambassadors, everything that happened there. So you do seem to see these videos kind of latching on to some of the main tensions. Same with Greece and Cyprus. Again, I talked about that kind of annus horribilis in 2020, and then you see those videos starting to grab attention there as well. And if we look at a particular slice into a particular case, we can see that the frequencies of the video the frequency of the videos does seem to increase after some of these major conflicts or major international incidents. So we just sort of randomly threw a line in there, Euphrates Shield, let's see if we see quite a lot of change. Again, you know, this is not necessarily something we're saying is causal, but it's interesting that the pattern seems to kind of condense after these major incidents. So the intertextual analysis, again, I think is always more interesting. I find the patterns, okay, cool, but I think the themes are really, really important. So there's very much a sense that there's a threat to self, to our borders, to our identity. Again, this is the video that I was talking about earlier. You have these marauding Christians, these Greeks and these Cypriots, and they're denying us our rightful access. And so we need to organize and kind of rally against them. Threats to the extended self as well, to Turkic groups, to individuals from Azerbaijan, to the Ummah, particularly to Palestinians. So you see lots and lots of videos about Palestine that then tie Palestine to the Turkey cause, as though Turkey were sort of the vanguard and the defender of Palestinians. And then again, these vague or suggested threats, where you don't have a flag necessarily, or a particular individual, or a particular leader, but you're using religious symbols, or you're using things like prison bars in order to convey some kind of threat, right? With Palestine written over the top and some kind of children looking out sadly from the side. And then you can see a Jewish star on the side there as well. So again, what we've seen in the history videos, it makes sense that we're going to see some similar content. There, of course, are videos that belong in both data sets, because this one is the wider one. But linking those historical threats to present ones, again, we see the marauding Christians that we need to defend ourselves against. And then I think this is really interesting. It kind of goes with the increase in techno-nationalism that we've been seeing and our level of preparedness and military superiority. You see that coordinated vigilance in the Mavi Vatan image, but there's also a lot of military training videos. Like this is a rap video that shows soldiers kind of training and being armed and ready and willing to sacrifice and willing to fight. So lots and lots of we are ready and we are willing and we're very good at our job kinds of videos. And if you want to watch a Turkish military rap video, this would be your occasion to do so. So I hope that this has made you think that these videos are important, that we should think about audio visualizing our own strategies, because governments are certainly doing so. Again, I think images, you know, 1,000 words, all those good cliches. But here you have kind of a Dumlupinar image that would be familiar over the presidential palace here lit up with drones. So again, linking the two together. As I said, one of these articles is coming out in Perspectives on Politics. So hopefully you will read that and hopefully we'll have more projects coming soon. Thank you so much.
Gonna come next to you to
Oh, yeah.
coordinate the rest of this. Thank you so much. That was a fantastic talk, and I think of this fantastic project. Now I'm going to open the floor to discussion, but can I just say perhaps a few words before we do so? Now, what I find more, very interesting is, I've been working a lot with discourse and discourse analysis in my own work, especially in the past. And, there was all this talk that discourse is not just about speech, but there's something called the multimodal discourse. And I think this is a great example to that. So, it's something that you might want to keep in mind as well, that, that discourse scholars often refer to this as a multimodal form of genre, which is what this is. And this is great. The second point is, it's sort of, again, there's this selective narration of history business that, we've also done quite a lot of work on. And what we refer to with a co-author of mine called chronopolitics. Now, of course, we don't look at it from, the audiovisual sort of video point of view, but we look at it from how time is instrumentalized, how different constituencies in society and also in politics, not just the AKP, by the way, right? They have different golden ages. Exactly. And that's how they idealize them. And this is not just, of course, in Turkey, you have it in various places across the world. So much of the domestic, contestation over political power in many countries these days, you see, is in fact a different form of chronopolitics in place, right? So they are contesting and they're competing versions of the age that we should go back to, right? And if any of you have, the fans of literature, there's a novel about this called The Time Shelter, which I thought was fantastic. It's how, it's literature, but I thought it sort of connects very much to some of the academic work that you, I, Bahar, we do as well. So I thought that was very, very interesting, that something to keep in mind, right? That, all those strategies, this is what the government does, but then, it's a presentation of history in a certain way, but also of time in a certain way, right? A look at time in a given way. So something that you might want to think about, and that sort of made me think about as well, especially when you were talking about historical continuity. Okay, so I think this is great, and I might just come back with just very thought-provoking. But I think we can, if you want to say something about these, and then, but if you don't want to, it's also okay.
No, I really appreciate you mentioning that. There's always some of the buzzwords that I should remember to use. So we do talk in the paper how this is a multimodal analysis, discourse.
Yeah, just in case you come across some discourse people who review any of these papers, they would point it out.
Yes,
so.
And your chronopolitics argument is in there as well.
Yeah,
so.
Okay, perfect. Okay, fine. I think we're going to open it for the discussion to the floor. I see Emine.
This is like incredible. I have been thinking about it a lot, but I wasn't sure that anyone would be crazy enough to sit down and just like all this. So there are two things that I'm curious and maybe a little bit concerned about. So first of all, the 2015-2016 shift not only is about the coup, but also is about the fact that father and son is in fact Erol Olçak and his son. Yes. And Erol Olçak is a different understanding of PR.
Yep.
And there was an incredible shift after his death. Let it be them not being as talented as political communication as him, or just like Fahrettin Altun, who God rest his soul.
Always relevant, always topical.
Decided to just like move to different. So it would be interesting to see, in fact, how Olçak was bringing all of those things in, because I remember this very catchy "Aynı sudan içmişiz biz, aynı yoldan geçmişiz biz" story, which is very different than creating enemies, right? Because it is telling people that we are the same, we are together, there is no division between us, blah, blah, kind of thing. And the second one is, this is something more of a curiosity. I think the idea of having vague enemies is in fact way more important to theorize. Because I remember reading this piece by James Robinson and his co-authors on Colombia, how the need for creating enemies is in fact the need for the personality. Because what they are saying is, especially in Colombia, yes, I started this part business and militia, but I'm the only person who can end it. So then is Erdogan saying, yes, I'm aware of the fact that the economy is in the gutter, but I'm also the only guy who can help himself. So like this vague enemy kind of stuff. Also, I think we can use the idea of politics in a different way by saying that if they feel like there is an inner enemy, these videos will have a different set of people, like black and white soldiers kind of stuff. If they were trying to sell the idea that the enemies are at the border, that they're pushing it, marauding Christians, especially probably Istanbul would be the key point because there's still this underlying feeling that they're trying to get Istanbul from us.
Yeah.
And then maybe those are the times when there's an incredible xenophobia around like Erdogan and his speeches. So it is interesting. And then there was a third point that I just remembered, which would also be interesting why Cyprus is at the very end. It was like when you list the videos.
Why was it so, it's like, okay,
so
3 videos,
the
yeah.
1974 Cyprus campaign was the last thing that they were talking. And it was interesting.
It was the least frequent.
Yes, because it's just like, why are you not using probably the only victory you had against the EU? Like you are effectively conquered their land and you are still sitting there. So that is, I think, interesting and fine.
Great. Shall we collect a few? Or
That was already a few, but yeah, we can collect a few more.
up to you.
Let me really quickly and address the 3,
Okay.
because I think they were all really good points. I think the vague enemies one, I think, is really interesting, and I like your point about internal enemies versus external enemies and what that's trying to convey. I actually incorporate some of the filmmaking literature in that how a vague enemy can be scarier than a concrete one. And it also, again, allows you that political flexibility to suggest what this might be without having to kind of specify it. So it gives you the idea of this nefarious other, but you're not really sure who it is. But I very much appreciate the internal outside. That makes a lot of sense. On the Istanbul and kind of the Christians are still trying to get us, what immediately came to mind was the way in which Hagia Sophia and kind of the conversion of that into a mosque was something that audiences that were not just AKP aligned were very happy with, because it was like, this is sovereignty, where it's a sovereign decision. You don't get to tell us what to do with our own territory. And yeah, I don't have a good answer as to why the 1974 Cyprus operation comes up infrequently. It could be because of who was in government at the time, who led it. And they want to kind of emphasize the current threats and how they're handling them. Might be my first primary and intuitive response to that.
Not my intuitive response to that. It's like, since you work
on
those things, I want to.
Yeah, that's my sense, but I should probably explore that further. Thank you so much for those comments.
Maybe one other thing that I might add from this discussion. I mean, much of this is about self and other relationships, right? And much of those external others that are portrayed in these videos are associated with, in fact, domestic others.
Exactly.
And I think that might be an important point. You know, that's something that, you might want to, pick up or think about, as well as I know that you've also been doing a lot of work on this self and other relationship in the past, because this is all about, the building of identity and identities and different categories. So you use history to sort of feed into those categories and to make them concrete, whereas we all know that they're not, right, and contested.
Absolutely.
Okay, I've seen a few other hands. Yes.
I never thought I would see crusaders as football hooligans, but they really look like football hooligans. And that makes me think of how nationalism and sport can come together, how the football supporters came together as a threat to Gezi, came together as a threat as an internal threat to the government. But also when you're playing football, the enemy is a temporary enemy. It's a constrained enemy, and it means that you're in the league. So it kind of like the fact that you are fighting the Crusaders in that sort of sense gives the impression that, maybe you're playing Poland, and so Poland is your enemy that one day, but then another day it could be someone completely different.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really matter as long as you're all in in the arena together.
Yeah, and that I think is a really nice way of getting at a lot of the status that I think is part of what Erdogan is trying to do when he's saying that the UN is bigger than five, and Turkey is the vanguard of the first. It was kind of the Ottoman territories, then it was the Ummah, now it's the global South writ large. I think it's very much like a great power, a non-great power kind of punching above its weight and saying we are in that league, we're on that playing field, and we're an equal member. So that's a great way of conveying that message. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. So I'm a high school intern from school. So my question would be like kind of related to like internal enemies and like the regime creating kind of like enemies or hostilities that would kind of bring us together and legitimize their authority. So it kind of relates to the Kurdish issue in Turkey. So I've seen some content and like speeches and like qualitative analysis on how the AKP and the MHP like uses Nationalist Movement Party uses the Kurdish people and the PKK and like kind of like portraying them as threats, particularly the Kurdish people, in order to kind of convey the idea that Turkey should be a sovereign country and like can't be kind of affected by other cultures and nationalities or religions. So it kind of made me think like it's kind of similar to the idea that like it's like portraying like Christians and like other religions, like minorities in Istanbul as like enemies to Turkish culture and like unanimous like kind of political agenda. So have you like come across any like audiovisual content related to like these Kurdish issues and also like maybe like kind of messages that would be not like overtly against Kurdish culture, but like kind of maybe be discriminatory?
Do you want to collect?
I'll collect a few. Thank you. Any?
I'd like to briefly ask whether you had a chance to call what is not shown, what is hidden in the video, because it both help to construct non-reality in a sense.
Okay.
And I think Jana?
Related to my research, I was working on framing theories in Arabic studies. Do you also come across common phrases that are used mostly? Are there any changes during time? So just curious.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right.
Quite a few.
Yes, and really good questions too. And each one deserves a paper. So on the Kurdish question, thank you so much for raising that. And I think, and as Sanam Hoja mentioned earlier, kind of who is the us and who is the them changes over time, particularly in populist governments. There's sort of this tactical flexibility that allows them to construct an other and kind of bring some of the formerly others in when it's convenient or politically feasible or useful, and then perhaps they become the other, as we saw like in 2015. So you had the Shuzum Süreci, right, and the Kurds are kind of part of the process, and then all of a sudden they're on the outs, right, and then the MHP comes in. Well, yeah, the Gülenists, and then the Kurds, and then the MHP, right? So there's this tactical reframing that can happen, and so what I have seen quite a lot of the audiovisual content on the Kurdish issue that you mentioned, and one of the strategies that I saw that we talk about in the personality cult paper is there's kind of a counter Cumartesi Anneleri strategy. And so they go and they interview moms who are like, my son went to the mountains and I'm so mad, and I want to be part of this nation, and he's lost, but I still believe in my leader. And like it's some in Turkish, some in Kurdish. And so I think that is actually kind of a smart tactic to take, or I guess I don't need to make a value judgment there, but that's definitely a strategy to counter that particular narrative, and then to show that they can be part of the fold as well. You'll often see in one of the data sets, the first vote to get 1 million, or the first video to get 1 million views. Again, views are problematic, but they can give you a general sense of this, was a 2017 referendum vote, and it's something like we're all together, and yes. to kind of get at that, you know, sometimes we're dividing and sometimes we're uniting. And it may depend on who is the, you know, director at the time. But there'll always be kind of a woman in a white headscarf. There'll always be like symbolic references to Kurdish individuals to kind of almost like token references that they are part of this as well. So you'll see those symbolic references, but particularly on the Kurdish issue, those mothers videos is probably the one that stands out the most. Thank you. Let's see, on what is not coded. If you would like to consult on a paper on how to measure that, I would love to. It's a wonderful question. You know, why are particular, this kind of gets to the Cyprus 1974 question. Why is it only coming up several times and in what contexts? Why some leaders and not others? Again, I think I would go to the fact that rhetorically, the AKP has kind of pointed to particular historical figures, right? It was Menderes, it was Özal, you know, then you're going to try and take us down as well. You know, they're not showing Bülent Ecevit. He's not coming up in the videos as a hero, right? So I think that probably is part of it, but I really like your question. I need to think further about how to conceptualize what isn't shown. One initial thought would be not only politically opposite, but yeah, polarizing ones, like, because they're trying to choose individuals that can appeal to wide audiences. Are there those that are more polarizing? But I will think more about that. And then on framing, excellent question. So there's all kinds of different conceptual approaches that we can use to kind of try and capture what is going on. In the book project on populist grand strategy, we look at frames and narratives. We look at us versus them frames, and then we look at great history narratives. So some of the work that I did on this project is spilling over into that book. But certainly the sense that, you know, there are the kind of diagnostic frames about what's wrong, prognostic frames about what should be used, motivational frames about this is why it matters. I think that's a really useful approach to take. It's not one that we used in this particular project, but you're absolutely right that that is a really nice way to get leverage on what are the ways in which the party is trying to communicate what's wrong, what should be done about it, and why you should care.
Okay, Emine.
Suggestion on what I can just
Sure.
open. You can use time frames to see what's hidden and
Sure.
what's not shown. So you can look at like very important political events and try to see what kind of videos were prepared for that. And then it would be easier for you, or if you want like outside opinion, almost like an expert survey, ask people randomly that whom do you think would have appeared on
Yeah,
those
that's a good point.
videos? And then check the ones which appeared and it's not. For example, if you're talking about Mavi Vatan,
Yeah.
Cyprus should be there.
Yeah.
And if it's not, then there's something about the fact that it's a Bülent Ecevit thing, and Bülent Ecevit is not only Bülent Ecevit, but he's also a left.
Exactly.
Like, he is, by the way, probably is one of the least polarizing left figures that they can come up with, but their loved one seemingly there is White House, so who knows? And so you can just use that, like, look at Mavi Vatan, look at
What would you
Mavi
expect?
Vatan,
And
what
then
would you expect? You as the expert or any other, like a group of people, like an expert survey, ask them, whom do you think would appear on like Mavi Vatan?
It's a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah, doing like a historical sequence perhaps
Yeah.
of selected events, and then, yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Or even looking for it in a different outlet and see like how, you know, maybe newspapers at the time, or like how other ideologically oriented outlets covered it, and then why is it not showing up? Why are the figures that are coming up frequently there not coming up frequently here? That's very good. Yeah, thank you.
Athena?
Thanks a lot. Actually, while listening to you, I always thought of the TV series, the TRT, and to be the digital platform of TRT. And I mean, the characteristics are very common, like the historical references and the conception of thread. And considering the investment the state is doing on all these productions, it's, I mean, it's very important field to study, but I don't know whether anyone has the patience that you have to look at all these TV series. Maybe one day someone would do.
No, there is.
There is?
It's like a niche cottage industry. It's there. So, and in fact, I mentioned that sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but just because there's such a incredible literature on this. Senem Çevik and Burak Özçetin and Ergün Bulut and Bilgi Yeşil and like they
Communication scholars.
communication scholars, media studies scholars, Ateş Altınurdu, sociology, and they look primarily at the television series. And so what we wanted to do with this is saying, okay, there's a lot of focus on the television series. Let's look at this other kind of forum as well. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. But yes, they have done a lot of this analysis. It's really impressive.
No, some people have this patience. And that's what, I mean, whenever I think of these series, I think, I mean, videos like this, I mean, these things are sometimes discussed with reference to cultural hegemony. And, you know, Fahrettin Altun, I mean, years ago, shared a photo from a bookstore on Istiklal Street with all the books by leftist writers and saying, oh, one day we will have the cultural hegemony. And when you look at the production, I mean, as they don't produce qualified or popular TV series or film, you might claim that they cannot establish cultural hegemony. But maybe the establishing of the dominance of the mediocre can be considered as, I mean, establishing of a cultural hegemony, but I mean, just to bring this cultural hegemony discussion.
Absolutely, yeah. And so that was part of the project that I was presenting last year. So I have a book on popular culture as political battleground, as asymmetric political battleground. So the government has particular advantages institutionally, political economy. They can censor, they can also produce. I kind of saw the Muhteşem Yüzyıl controversy as this inflection point. And like, okay, we need to actually, and then Gezi comes right after. Okay, the artists are organizing and the population's riled up and Halit Ergenç is there and we need to do something. And then you see Diriliş and then you see the TRT and the Tabi stuff. And now, I mean, Ayşe Barım, it's a full-on assault on the culture industry. So I really appreciate your cultural hegemony framing of the question.
Yes.
I was wondering, were all of the videos mainly in Turkish?
Good question.
Mainly the domestic audience, or did you also see some in English? And what kind of message did they have? Was it similar, or was there like a total different kind of point they were trying to make?
Fantastic question. So that comes down to how did we code the videos and what were our inclusion criteria? And one was it had to have Turkish language or Turkish subtitles, because we were looking at domestic audience production. So of all the videos, like 11,165 are the videos that were shared by these channels that have either Turkish audio or subtitles.
Yes.
I have two little questions. One is the role of the United States. And one of the most vivid images I remember is the Turkish soldiers in head
the hooding.
sacks in Iraq. That I think is an image that says 1,000 words. So what did you find about the United States in your data set? And the other one is, I'm pretty sure most of these appear on public transportation. So it might be interesting also to know where these videos are.
Yeah.
Right, because when I take the metro, I see produced videos.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I would choose it or not. And so that goes to your viewing problem. Like if it's played on public media, then it's viewed many more times by people who wouldn't click on it. So it has a much broader viewing.
Definitely. So I'm still hand coding the foreign videos. So I do see the hoods. I've seen that come up in the US. I do think that incident, I mean, it was an incident that was the spawn of the Valley of the Wolves Iraq film, right? To get back to the pop culture element of it, it starts with the hooding incident. So I do see that come up. I haven't been through all the US videos yet, so I don't know how many times or how it's used, but I agree that the fact that even in the partial coding that I've done, that it comes up means that it's something, again, that is that you get the information across really quickly, it's emotionally really provocative, and there's a wider geopolitical context and betrayal associated with it. And the public transportation, I think, is such a good question. Although my understanding would be that it would depend on who is the belediye başkanı and what they are showing on the public transportation. And I think the fact that, well, I won't get too much into maybe local Istanbul politics, but when I would take the metro from Haji Osman to Boğaziçi every day, I probably got like, an hour and 10 minutes of exposure each way. And I understood why people were saying that Imamoglu was kind of starting to resemble Erdogan a little bit in the way that he was positioning himself at the center of every project and the construction hat, and I'm the one who's making all these things possible. So yeah, I wish I would have collected data on that, but I love this point about where you're seeing it matters, or even if it doesn't matter, it does mean that you have extra levels of exposure that you're not touching just with the YouTube counts.
Oh, yeah.
So like from this data set, it everything relates to multiple literatures, I guess. And one of the things I think I mentioned by Selam is Turkey's North contestation. So do you have any specific variables that would be in this regard, other than the enemy variable that you mentioned?
That's a great question. No, I don't, but what I could do, and maybe because we're still coding the foreign other, is code how much of like challenge of the liberal order. How many times do you see the UN is bigger than 5? I mean, because that comes up a lot in these videos, and other people referencing it, and other people saying Turkey should be at the table and contesting kind of the Western-led. This, lots of our scholars, and Yerdem is writing on this, like post-imperial anti-imperialism. Aisha's article, lots of people kind of talking about these interesting ways in which there's this civilizational element to Turkey's attempt to project status as well. So that's actually a really good idea. Can I code specifically for contesting the norms of the liberal international order, or however you want to define it? Thank you for that.
You had another question. Yeah.
So my second question is kind of related to my third question. So I've also seen some like invalues or just like content wise, the regime kind of tries to restrict the content that kind of will be valued like viewed as West, for example, like LGBTQ content, gender-related content, even though it's not like necessarily LGBTQ.
Yeah.
So like Evren Savcı, and I believe like you has really good work with this, like especially for Turkey. So like not as common as I believe like British politics, like British like kind of rhetoric, but like with like, for example, when you try to view movies or like content related to LGBTQ, like storylines, you kind of see that like in Turkey it's really hard to talk about this and kind of reach these topics. So like audiovisual content wise, do you think that it's while they're like trying to kind of portray LGBTQ people, but also like human rights actors as like enemies of Turkish values and like they're aligned with Western values, they're trying to also restrict these content for like public view.
Absolutely.
So like because like I haven't seen much of like audiovisual content directly coming from the government or like from other like political institutions about LGBTQ.
You won't, it's banned.
Yeah.
On Turkish Airlines, if you have a television show that's streaming on your screen and they talk about gay issues, that it goes silent.
Yeah.
So it's someone, probably you've seen that on social media, someone posted recently, but this is something that I've observed as well, but it's a really, really good question. You look at films like Kurak Günler, which got funding from the culture ministry, and then it has a queer theme and they have to give back the funding with interest, right? So I have two, in addition to the book project that I mentioned earlier that talks about this and traces the, it was right after the 2023 elections, there was this like narrative about sociocultural terrorism. And it was this idea that any kind of, Disney Plus or streaming platform that included any kind of queer content was Western inspired terrorism against Turkish culture. And I do a TikTok of like where that narrative started and how it went through the pro-government media, and then it got into the discourse, and then they're calling for legislation. So I have two separate projects, one on future projects, one on particularly trying to look at a global data set of restrictions on media content when it comes to LGBTQ plus issues. And then another one more broadly on sanctions on media content as like in the IR sanctions literature. So the way in which we can see, for example, during the GCC crisis, that Turkey sided with Qatar, and all of a sudden Saudi pulls all of its Turkish television content, and that was like 80% of its content, and the channel directors were freaking out because they didn't know what to show. Egypt had a fatwa against Turkish television content. So when is media like the site of we're going to sanction you? Maybe a global data set about that. But I appreciate the point about, in terms of like what's not showing up, right? You got those token references. You don't have a token queer person in those videos, right? That's not going to happen because of the particular conservative, populist narrative that they used. Very, very good points.
See?
You said something about, first of all, I have to say I'm fascinated. And thank you for your patience because I don't know.
It did take a long time.
You said something about 2021, why the number of videos spiked up in 2021. That would be interesting to hear. And then I'm now kind of trying to think about this gives us a great segue into, where people get their information from as well. And yesterday I was at a meeting where they were basically saying that there are people within the presidency whom, journalist friends have talked with, and they are literally afraid that Israel is going to attack Turkey. And I was like, how is this possible? Like, what is this, where does this, misinformation comes from? And now I'm thinking, maybe they're only watching the, Diyanet videos on YouTube, So it gives us a wonderful tool in terms of, getting into the minds of, people who do not think like us. So yeah, I'm basically just, inspired and totally
Thank you.
But I would like to hear more about the 2021 spike in the number of videos.
Yeah, so it's both in the number of videos and in the percentage of videos that are referencing history. And the way in which we at least explain the latter is that kind of post this incident between, or this set of tensions between Turkey, Greece, Cyprus, that you see a lot of references to, again, this particular era, similar stuff to the marauding Christians that you see. So that's a lot of the content that's fueling that. And yeah, in terms of where people are getting their information, I think this is part of it. But I also just think of like the talking heads on television, right? That some of the things that are being discussed and so that would be another really interesting discourse analysis project of threat construction, right? Because to listen to them, Pokemon is a Japanese psych op who is, with a Pokemon, Pikachu, yeah, Pikachu. So those kinds of things that are talked about and kind of given airtime, given fuel to the fire, all that kind of stuff, I think is really interesting. So I would look there as well. But I think this is a good place to start.
Okay. Yes.
I'm also an intern from I'm 11th grade high school.
Thank you for coming.
So I have a question about the titles that are using in the movies and the TV series, because some of the titles started to disappear, such as Pasha, which means the master of the rural area, which claims the rural area is they own all the people who live in there, and they claim that their work is there. And this title started to reappear in the TV shows. Even though they're not historic, they're not used in any historical content. And how do you think it affects the how do you think it's affected people who live and people watch the series? Do you think it will send us back to the 1930s where the titles are starting to disappear, or how will it affect the society?
Your interns are having some incredibly good questions. I have to say, I'm extremely impressed. When I was in high school, I did not have these sophisticated ideas.
Unbelievable.
My goodness. So looking at, show titles as a way to trace kind of what are the narratives or the frames being used, I think is brilliant. I think when we think about what is typical of a lot of populist, again, framing and narratives, it's this nostalgia. It's kind of getting back to our roots. And obviously that looks different for different populations, right? You can have Hindi populism, you can have leftist South American populism. They all have different roots, right? pre-imperialist, indigenous or agrarian roots in one case. So, I mean, I think this makes a lot of sense that populism is going to think about kind of the throwback to the old days and the simpler times, right? When, of course, those times weren't necessarily better for anybody, but we make people believe that it is, and that's very much what populists say. We're going to take you back to these good times. So it makes a lot of sense that you're observing that trend. Brilliant.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Oh, wow. Okay, I think this has been a terrific discussion. So thank you, Lisel, for your fantastic work and for also this great talk. I'd like to thank the audience as well for being so engaged and with all your thoughtful comments and questions.
Very, very helpful.
We're in the middle of summer, and it's boiling out there, and then we have a good crowd and being engaged with this topic. I'm super happy to have hosted this morning. Thank you so much, Lisel.
Thank you. Politics all over.